Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up. Our first guest is Pam Jenoff, and she's here today to share with us her new novel, The Lost Girls of Paris. Now, Pam is the author of several novels, and her most recent, of course, is The Lost Girls of Paris and The Orphan's Tale, both instant New York Times bestsellers. Pam has received wide acclaim, earning her a nomination for the Quill Awards and becoming an international bestseller. So let's welcome to the show, Pam Jenoff.
Thanks so much for having me.
What a pleasure it is to have you here, and congratulations. I hear your book is getting such great reviews.
Thank you. I'm honored by the reception that it's received.
Now, any author I know is very tickled pink about that. I know your book has just been flying off the shelves, and I would love for you to share with us your inspiration behind writing this book.
So the inspiration for The Lost Girls of Paris came from the true story of British women who served in the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, during World War II. Now, SOE was created by Winston Churchill in the darkest days of the war, in his own words, to set Europe ablaze. And what he wanted was agents to drop behind enemy lines and engage in sabotage and subversion to slow down the Germans before the cross-channel invasion. But what happened was they found that male agents were very readily detected on the streets of occupied France. And so the idea came to send women over. And these women were recruited and trained, and they deployed, and they did all the same work as the men, radio work and couriering and such. And they did a really good job. However, through a series of betrayals, many of the agents, including some of the women, were arrested and killed. And so my book looks fictitiously at these agents and what might have happened to them.
Well, when you found this tidbit of history and you were kind of doing your research into it, was there something that kind of surprised you as you were doing your research?
A few things. One was the scope and the breadth of the heroic acts of these women. I've been working with World War II for over 2 decades. This is my 10th book, and I had never really heard about the women or their heroic work. And then, of course, the other thing was the betrayals, the notion that these women had been sold out, and there were a number of theories of how that might have happened, and some of them are rather shocking.
Well, and it's interesting when we look at this period of time, most women, weren't this involved in the military when you look at it. I mean, there were some pilots that, I guess at one point they really needed pilots, but you look at just how women became operatives and what that meant.
Yes, well, the really interesting thing when SOE decided they should recruit women was sort of, well, where are we going to get them from? Because they didn't have this natural pipeline from the military or the colleges that they did with the men. But women did come from all walks of life to train and deploy for SOE.
Well, and so when we look at this, were there other bits of historical information that popped up that kind of collaborated the way that you wanted to take this story?
Yes. So, it's interesting. My story goes from 3 points of view, and there's a woman in 1944 France who's one of the agents, and then the spy handler, Eleanor Trigg, and she's in London sort of looking after the girls and is very guilt-ridden and goes to find out what happened to them afterward. And then I have a character, Grace, who's in 1946 New York, connected to the story. So the interesting thing was not only the women who went to France, but this very enigmatic woman in real life. Her name was Vera Atkins, and she was the spy handler in London. And I fictionalized her as Eleanor Trigg. But Vera was a fascinating woman. She was not British. To a point, she wasn't even naturalized. She was of East European descent, and so she was very much an odd duck, and yet she found herself in charge of the female agents for SOE.
It must have been just an insane calling. I couldn't imagine being in charge of people and their lives in that manner,
And after it all went horribly wrong, she felt very guilty, and she went over to Europe to find out what had happened to the girls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and so because when we talk about fictions and historical fictions on this show, we don't really dive into it too much. And you've kind of shared a little bit with us in regards to the story. What else would you like to share?
Well, the woman in 1946 New York is terribly interesting. Her name's Grace Healy, and she's what I call not quite a war widow because she lost her husband during World War II, but not to combat. She lost him in a pre-deployment accident. And so Grace is struggling with grief and guilt and trying to figure out what comes next when she finds a suitcase in Grand Central containing the pictures of 12 young women, and she sets out to find out who they are and return the suitcase.
And it takes on from there. It goes on from there.
Yes.
Well, you have a way of weaving a tale that makes people just kind of dive into the book. And again, we don't want to give too much away. But let's talk about your writing process, because I know a lot of writers that listen to this show, often we get emails going, what is the writing process for something like this like? I mean, do you just know intuitively or by your gut when you get a piece of information, it's like, gosh, I need to run this down and this would be a great story?
Well, for me, the thing when I go looking for a story that shows promise is if it's sort of, my breath catches when I read the story. And I figure if I'm that taken by it, hopefully my readers will be too. So, of course, for historical fiction, there's really two pieces of the process. One is the research piece of it. And so I'm what I would call a contemporaneous researcher, which means I only need so much to start, and then I can research as I go, which is very useful. In terms of my writing process, I'm sure you've heard from other authors that there are two types of writers, plotters and pantsers. So plotters are those dear souls who have an outline and write chronologically and make it all look nice before they move on. And that isn't me. I'm a pantser, and pantser stands for seat of the pants. And that means that when I get an idea to write, I just start and I go blah, and all the words come out at the same time in random order. And then I have to make it look like a book, which is just a terrible editing process.
It's a lot of work and involved in something like that, and especially when you look at just getting a book together and making sure that you keep a storyline that's really intriguing, because that can be a little difficult.
Yes. So for this book, when I chose the three narrator, structure, I have three different women telling their story. A big challenge was how to interweave those three stories, which span multiple years and multiple continents and everything. And so for me, it's that braiding together of the stories and making sure you're dropping just the right amount of information in just the right sequence to keep the reader going forward.
Is there any point where you get additional information, you're like, okay, I can't find a fit for this that would work within the storyline?
Well, it's funny. With historical research, I think one of the big questions is how to weave history and fiction. So the danger, of course, is always that I'm going to think something is so interesting that I'm going to want to put a big dump of material in the middle of the story in a way that will just slow down the plot for the reader. So that's perhaps the biggest challenge is, can I use this? Where can I use it? Can I break it up into small pieces? If not, can I set it aside to see if I can use it later, possibly?
Well, and so let's talk about your intrigue with World War II. I mean, is this something that's been lifelong for you?
Well, I did always enjoy the World War II, books. However, my real love for the period started about just over 20 years ago when I was a diplomat for the U.S. State Department, and they sent me to Krakow, Poland. And I found myself there at a wonderful moment when the country had just emerged from nearly a half century of communism. And all during the communist era, they had never been able to resolve their issues from World War II. They had no free speech. They simply couldn't do it. And so when I arrived, and I'm personally Jewish, I became very close to the Holocaust survivors. And the U.S. government saw my relationship and sort of gave me this portfolio of Holocaust issues. And for 2.5 years, that was my job in a way that was personally and professionally challenging and transforming. And so when I came back from those years in Europe, I knew that I was going to write a book based on what I had experienced there.
was it quite a jump for you from moving from the job that you were in to writing, or is that something that kind of transitioned nicely?
Well, I should say I still have a day job. I am proud to teach law school at Rutgers University, which I think is just the greatest place. And so I still juggle. But what happened with writing was I had always wanted to be a writer. I had never gotten started. And after diplomatic service, I went to law school, and I became a lawyer on September 4th, 2001, is the day I started practicing. 1 week later, 9/11 happened. And I had a real-life epiphany that I had always wanted to be a writer and that I didn't have forever to get started. So that was the moment that I started writing in earnest. However, I was still an attorney at a big firm, and I had $1,000 in student loan debt to repay every month. And so for many years, I wrote my books from 5 to 7 in the morning before I went to the firm each day.
It's really interesting. I think a lot of times people feel that if someone's a writer, they don't do anything else. And so I love that you shared with us that, of course you've got other things that you're involved in and busy doing.
I have 3 small children, so I have 2 jobs and 3 kids, and, and frankly, I do better when I'm busy. When I'm not busy, it's almost a sense of too much time, and it's not my most productive state, I would say.
Yeah, it's easy to see that, we're just with so much going on, and, it's writing isn't the end game. That's for most people, it's a passion.
It is. For me, it's both it's passion and it's job, I have to take a business-like approach to it and sort of move forward every day as well.
Well, and so, you talked about how you kind of carve out time in your, to do writing and create this book. How long did it take from the time you decided on the topic to the book going to the editor?
So Lost Girls of Paris is my 10th book, and I used to write a book a year, but I'm getting older, the books are getting harder, and I have really discovered that for me, both creatively and commercially, it's advantageous to slow down a bit and do a book, every year and a half to 2 years, really. So it varies in the process, and also it's a question of when you say a book is done, what does that actually mean? Because my books go through really heavy editorial rounds, and we have to build in time for that too. So, I'd say more than a year and less than 2 years.
I guess done is relative.
Yes.
I know we've had authors here that have shared with us that, even when the book is on its way to the publisher, they're still making changes or changing the plot. And sometimes it can be a lot of work to kind of get that going.
Oh, I don't even want to tell you that right now I'm still asking if we can make changes in the next printing.
Well, then maybe there'll be a special surprise in the next printing. You never know. Well, and is there ever a time, especially with the Lost Girls of Paris, has there been a time where you have maybe gotten stuck during your writing process?
I'm sorry, say that one more time. When I have gone back during my writing process.
When you were writing The Lost Girls of Paris, was there a time when you kind of got stuck during your writing process?
So in general, I have a theory that I don't believe in writer's block, and let me explain why. When I was a lawyer, if I had said, I'm just not motivated to write a brief today, I would have lost my job. And so I try and keep the writing on that same kind of forward path. But that's not to say I don't run into, gnarly bits, brush that's hard to get through. And so I'd say one great challenge with The Lost Girls of Paris was the mystery solving. So if you think about Grace, she's my character in 1946. She's in essence solving a mystery about the spy handler Eleanor and the lost girls as she's trying to figure out who the photographs belong to. And I might have set her in 2019, the front story character, but I wanted to show that piece of life in the U.S. after World War II. The catch is that in 1946, it's really hard to solve a mystery because you're not just going to hop on a plane to London or hop on the Internet or something like that. So one particularly tricky part about this book was figuring out how she could piece together the clues in a way that was plausible for 1946.
Yeah, it's not just like picking up a phone and going, okay, we're going to make this work,
Exactly.
It's so much different. Well, when people are reading The Lost Girls of Paris, what would you like them to take away from this book?
Well, it's interesting. I don't set out to write a particular theme before, when I'm writing a book. It usually comes out retrospectively and oftentimes in conversation with readers. I think that The Lost Girls of Paris has a theme of the trust that we place in our government and whether such trust is warranted. So that's perhaps one question readers might think about. Additionally, however, this is really a book about strong women, and this book has been optioned for film. It's my first one to do so, and one of the people involved in the production has said this is really a book for the Me Too movement, the Me Too moment when women everywhere are finding their voices. So those are a couple of themes that come to mind.
I think that when we look in the 1940s, it's starting to emerge now, but there's not a whole lot of strong women characters, and this book does bring that forward.
Well, it's interesting. I think we're going through a renaissance of World War II novels right now, and many of them are written by women and feature female characters now. And for me, the appeal is that if you think about through normal history, a woman would have been on a very set path, but through war or other catastrophe, she's thrown off that path and sort of tested and challenged in ways that she couldn't have imagined. And the joy for me is in seeing how those characters respond.
How they all come together. Do you find that when you're writing that the characters kind of take a life of their own?
It's funny. Sometimes, yes. I've had characters pop up and say, it's my turn in the next book, when I didn't even know there was going to be a next book. And other times I joke, and although it's true, I was once so preoccupied by a character that I tripped over the toilet. And, we all know that's not in the middle of the room. So characters certainly take on a life of their own at times, but there's also times that I can sort of compartmentalize and put that aside until the next day.
And kind of, be able to move from there. So, well, gosh, you've got so many great books, and this is just a perfect, especially with this kind of weather, what a perfect book to read and just kind of stay home and snuggle in and read this. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your other books and be part of your community?
So let me say that I consider one of the great gifts of the Internet age is the ability for readers and writers to connect on and have conversations on a sustained kind of meaningful basis. So I always invite readers to find me either I have a Facebook author page or on Twitter or email or my website, www.pamjenoff.com, or wherever they're hanging out online so that we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, and it's definitely a fun conversation to be a part of. Pam, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's been such an honor to spend this time with you, Pam, and of course to talk about your new novel, The Lost Girls of Paris. Again, The Lost Girls of Paris are available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. If you'd like to connect with Pam, you can at her website, pamjenoff.com, and we'll have the link below. Well, we're going to pause here for a quick break. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest on Kat Sullivan, who's here to share with us her new books, Legends of the Grail and Heroines of Avalon. Ann attained her BA with honors at Holland University and her master's and doctorate degree in literature from Columbia University and King's College London. After co-owning and running the Healing Center of Santa Monica in the mid-90s, she moved to Santa Barbara County, where she continued to offer private consultations and workshops for people interested in their heroine's journey. In 2016, she began her return to the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, where she now lives. Her educational experiences coupled by life led her into the studies and practice of what makes one whole. So let's welcome to the show Ann Kate Sullivan.
Thank you. It's so good to be on.
What a pleasure it is to have you here. And you've got to be real excited because your books are getting such great reviews.
That's always a good thing. You always hope.
Well, and I'd be amiss if I didn't mention it's also getting a lot of book awards. You've won multiple book awards on both these books, so it's very exciting. And I have to ask, what started you down this path? Because I know that you've been following the Celtic goddesses for some time.
Well, what really got me going was my grandmother. These grandmothers will sit you down in their kitchen by the stove, and they'll start telling you tales of other countries and other worlds. And I grew up in Virginia, and the farm that we lived on, my grandmother lived on, had been a land grant from the King of England. So there were all kinds of stories about the men who were buried in the backyard. And I was fortunate when I was older to get an overseas research award to King's College London, where I obtained my doctorate eventually. It was quite the effort. But anyway, I got there and I was able to go to Bamborough Castle, where the Knights of Northumbria were meant to be from. So that's our lineage. And it just made me curious. I just had to go to these old stone circles and find out about my lineage and my DNA and how my ancestors operated. So that's what got me going.
That's kind of moved you in that direction. Well, and so when you started to, follow kind of this thread, and you're taking the stories that your grandmother's given you, and you're starting to do the research, at what point did you decide, hey, this is what's really like feeding my soul?
I think, maybe this is true for many people, but there was a certain point where I should have been at the top of my game. I had been a model, and I was getting my doctorate, and I had everything going for me, and I felt empty. I just felt this emptiness, and I started reading stories about the Arthurian legends, which appear in Heroines of Avalon, and there are stories about the wasteland, and that when you feel emptiness, it means that you've somehow gone off track spiritually. And so I decided to go on a quest to find out what my connection with spirituality was, as opposed to maybe other things I'd read about or churches or temples I'd been in, I wanted to go and discover my own true nature. And so I did the Arthurian quest. So they started out with the hero's quest, wound up on a heroine's quest, but you go out in that tradition, you go out looking for the four hallows. So you go out looking for your sword of truth and your cup of wisdom and your spear of light and your stone of destiny. And so I actually literally did that and went to all along the west coast of Ireland, digging up stories and finding things, and all through Cornwall and the south of England, actually all over England and Scotland, and also into France, and discovered these stories that opened up, really literally opened up the mythic imagination. This, I call it the in-world, where archetypal beings live and they can become your guardians and your friends and your companions.
And it's this journey that you're kind of taking with them.
Yeah, they reveal it. They're also challengers. The challengers are interesting too. They generally, the challenger, based on the hero and heroine's quest, tends to appear in the hero's quest. It tends to be the Green Knight or somebody along those lines who threatens to behead you, which is basically getting your head on straight. And on the heroine's journey, and the hero's journey too, it's the old woman of the world, the hag goddess. And she's also an amazing tester, challenger, to help you understand your truth and your diamond, the diamond of who you are, not the false self. The false self leads you into the wasteland or the land of despair. The true self is more of a diamond, and sometimes it's a diamond in the rough. We have to find it, but it's the diamond, and the diamond contains the truth of what it is we're here to share. You know, who we are as unique individuals, and the truth is really different for each person, like a snowflake. You know, it's just a different. Each person has a different quality, a different capacity, something different to offer and share, and it's exciting when you find it.
You know, it really is, and it kind of brings me to your book, Legends of the Grail, and how you dive into just kind of the rebirth, and I think in many ways, of the sacred feminine. And I'd love for you to share, you know, why this story is so important.
So I was talking about the way we quest for our hallow. So in the first two books in the series, Legends of the Grail is the first one, and Heroines of Avalon is the second. You can read them completely separately because first is Irish, second is British, but I wrote them simultaneously. And this is about finding the hallow of the sacred cup, the Grail, the cauldron. And it starts in the beginning in the Celtic tradition. In the Celtic tradition, the Grail is a cauldron of rebirth, and you go questing for it to really discover who you are as a feminine being. And both men and women discover this. And I think maybe in my life at the time when I was doing this research that I might have done really well in academia, but I was missing what the true feminine was. In fact, I don't think I even understood what that was. And so going and didn't even really have mentors. I would walk through the halls at the Bodleian in Oxford and Trinity College in Dublin and look at all the busts of all these white men, which was great, except that I was sort of young and fair-haired and very feminine. And I wanted to find these sort of the truth of what the feminine was for me. So in the west of Ireland, going along, following the path of W.B. Yeats and Lady Gregory and some of these characters who really brought the Irish stories back to life. And then there's still a literary renaissance going on in Ireland. There's a golden age going on. Anyway, in those stories, you find these wonderful characters. You find warrior goddesses such as Skayach, who, if the old warriors such as Cuchulainn wanted to become a true leader, a true hero, he had to jump a 22-foot ravine. He had to face this woman who would either kill him or challenge him until he became the diamond that he was. So the very first story in the book is about Kayser, and that story comes from the Labor Gabala, which was for a long time considered the history of Ireland. And it starts out with this woman who's the granddaughter of Noah. It's a biblical story. She's the granddaughter of Noah. She's not allowed to board the ark because she's in the wrong lineage. And she knows that the flood is coming, and she's concerned. And so, what do you do if you're not allowed to board the ark? You're not the right person. You've been demonized in some way. You just build your own ark and set sail, which is what she does. So I love her courage and she's ferocious, but she's lovely. And in Labor Gabala, Kayser and her 50 friends and her herd of horses are the first people to step foot in Ireland. And so she's the beginning of the goddess tradition. So that's very fun.
It has such great, when you hear these stories and these myths, it has such great meaning, I think, because people, they look at this and they're like, wow, okay, this resonates, and they can see where this goes back, because somewhere along the line, women have been demonized and they've been kind of left behind.
That was what's so fun about finding these Celtic stories, because if you look at the Roman, I love Roman and Greek mythology, but the feminine is almost always the lunar goddess, the one that's going to reflect the light of the masculine, which is fine. But in Celtic mythology, you find the solar goddesses, and they don't really need to reflect anybody because they have their own light, they have their own brilliancy, and Skye is going to be in battle with the men, and so is the Morrigan. And there's actually a solar deity. She was worshipped. I thought this was actually quite fun. She was worshipped. Early time. Some of these stories go back. The story of the Cailleach goes back 10,000 years. So we're talking about stories that are very ancient. So Anu, or Anya, was one of the very first goddesses of Ireland. And there are these two little mounds, these sort of hills in the southwest of Ireland, and they're called the Paps of Anu. And they made these little sort of chimneys, and they would light her nipples in the spring to celebrate the fertility of the goddess and the blossoming of the land. I always thought that was pretty wonderful. But Anya appears in the story too, and it's a great way of looking at we can each tap into our own brilliancy. And when I say that, I usually think of the color yellow. And when we tap into our own internal solar goddess, then we're not afraid to shine. Anya's not afraid to shine. She's not afraid to share her brilliancy. She's not afraid that people might demonize her or tell her that she's less than, because she knows it's not true. So she has a way of burning off untruth. And so she's another wonderful companion on the quest.
Well, it's interesting when we look back at all of this, at the mythology. I mean, one thing that comes up over and over and over again is when people talk about the Grail. And, so I'd love for you to share with us, because I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be here, but I would love for you to share with us, what is the Grail and why has it been sought after for so long?
Well, what's really wonderful about the Grail is it's many things. The Grail is many things. When I first encountered the Grail, I was in Glastonbury, and I had an encounter in meditation with the feminine face of God. And it was surprising for me and wonderful, and was really something I sought. And so at the time, I was looking at Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary as the Grail. And as my research took me further, I realized the Grail in the Arthurian tradition is the lost feminine. So at that particular point in time, we're in 5th century, the feminine is now being demonized. She's being lost. The land's going into despair. And so they ride out to find the cup, the Grail. And in some legends, it's the cup of Christ. It's the cup of rejuvenation. But in all stories, the cup represents wholeness. If you think about the top of the cup, it's circular. And so when you really go for the Grail, what you're going for are all of the aspects. In Britain, there are the 13 treasures of Britain. In all of the Grail stories, there are 4 hallows. So we're going to find, and sometimes it also can appear as a green stone, an emerald sometimes the blue stone. But basically what it is, it's the spark of light that resides within you that's a divine spark. And so on the quest, quite often you meet a challenger, and the challenger tends to be a woman, and she holds a cup. She holds the cup that you might or might not be able to sip from. In those days, they had the tradition of the well maidens, and so you go looking for the sacred well, and you hope that one of the Grail maidens arises. Or in the Irish tradition, older tradition, you might go to some place like Loch Rue and crawl on your belly into an ancient cairn, into the depths of the earth, and put your back against a stone. And in both ways, what you're doing is you're remembering the dreams of the earth. You're remembering that you're clay, that you come from the soil, and that there's a spark of light. Sometimes Anya will remind you that there's a spark of light. Sometimes you see it in the belly, sometimes the heart, sometimes the head. But there's a spark of light in you that's eternal. And when you find the Grail and when you sip from the Grail, that never leaves you. That spark of light is with you forever. It's with you forever anyway, but it becomes into your consciousness. And so there's a type of joy and a type of hope that is with you for them from that point forward.
Well, it seems that there's been a lot of misconceptions possibly about the Grail, or maybe, because I think a lot of people have chased it, or chased after it, thinking that it's a great source of power.
Well, it is elusive, and I don't, and like I said, I think the Grail, when you find the Grail, when you find your wholeness, everyone's a different snowflake, so you might find something different. But if you think of the crusade, so this is rather fun. I found out in my research that Eleanor of Aquitaine was my 25th grandmother. She was a queen of France and England, and she actually rode on the Third Crusade to the Holy Land. And they would ride on the Crusades because there were objects of power, and the Knights Templar did know about these objects of power. And there are all kinds of stories about the banking system and how it was developed, and all of these things that come from these sacred objects. But if for a moment what you do, and I think searching for these hallows, these sacred objects, is important, but what's really underneath all the stories, whether you're following Joseph of Arimathea and his sacred cup with the blood of Christ, or you're following the cauldron of rebirth in the old ancient cairns of Ireland, what you always seek is that, if you think about it for a minute, most people suffer. Most of life, the ego, the story of the ego, the story of human drama is that of suffering. And so when you go for the Grail, usually it's because you suffer so much you can't stand it anymore. Or the world seems so completely broken. I mean, if you look around right now, the environment's falling apart. Oh no, it's the end of the world. So you have that feeling. And at that point, you quest. Because when you make friends with the guardians of the land restores. And so in some way, we could even say collectively now, we're out of touch with that. We're out of touch with, how powerful is it to actually take a moment and go and stand just with your toes in the ocean, or just to spend a moment by a tree, or just to go sit by a sacred well and just breathe with it, and just acknowledge the power of the present moment and the many potentials and gifts that live here. And because at that point we know whatever crisis we find ourselves in, there's a solution. But we need guardians. We need silence. We need a moment with Marianne to just create with what wants to come forward. So many of the ancient traditions, we're not going towards the end of the world now. We're going towards the golden age. We're going to the age where Camelot arises, where Arthur comes out of the ground, and we establish some sort of unity. But you can't do it without the feminine. The feminine has to come forward. Like you can have 150 knights around the round table, but you need the goddess of sovereignty to come. Do you know the stories of the goddess of sovereignty?
No, I would love for you to share that with our listeners.
Okay, so in the Arthurian tradition, there's and actually even older, back to the stories of I have some of these in Legends of the Grail and Heroines of Avalon. But in the very beginning, there were these creator goddesses. And Heroines of Avalon, we have Erenrud, who sings with the stars, and her songs with the stars help all the flowers blossom and the trees fruit. And so when a knight comes in, or a man, a man comes in, a hero comes in, his impulse might be to try to dominate one of these beautiful beings. And if so, what she does is she disappears. When she reappears, she might show up as an ugly hag with warts and pustules and so forth. But the thing is, in that tradition, you cannot be king unless the goddess of the land, the queen of sovereignty, Queen Maeve in some traditions, deems it so. So let's say in the story of Gawain, he has to kiss the ugly hag because he has to embrace his own ugliness, and he has to learn not to dominate. And once he does that, she becomes the beautiful queen, and she allows him to rule. And so there are lots of stories here about the importance of the masculine, and this isn't just men, this is our masculine energy, being in harmony and balance with the earth. And that only when we find this magical cupbearer, this magical Grail maiden who also lives inside of all of us, can the masculine and feminine energies within us stand, and can we and in that way we emerge as whole creative beings. So in some of the stories, a man gone is, and if you think of his name for a minute, a man gone comes and he rapes the Grail maiden. And so they disappear from the earth. And when they disappear from the earth, you get the wasteland of the low grade. Everything goes into despair. There's too much rain one place. It's burning someplace else. The weather's crazy. It sounds familiar. And so he has to make peace with her, with the feminine. He has to go back and say, oh gosh, I'm really sorry. I haven't listened to you. I didn't honor the flowers. I didn't honor the trees. I didn't honor the sky. I didn't honor everything that was already here. Please forgive me and let me dance with you. And so again, it's the story of equality, the male, female dancing together. And so life flourishes. There are all sorts of, in my book, it's a series of tales, but there are also ways, there are practices and so forth that you can do in the book so that you can start to enter into this in-world, enter the mythic imagination, which can keep you alive in the darkest of times,
Oh, yeah. Well, and I love it because it does give a lot of inspiration, and I feel it's very empowering for women, because how often do we go through, life and we just don't have those empowering stories or legends of women as your books do?
Each one is very empowered. They're actually so fun. Just starting from the very beginning, with Kesar building her own ark, and Anya shining her own light, and Skaya empowering the warriors. There's also, I was talking about the goddess of sovereignty, and the oldest version of her is she's known as the Kaliach. And it's said that you're very fortunate if you ever get to meet the Kaliach, but she's very she's considered dangerous. So she's the hag, and she's got the warts, and she's got all of this. And so each year, Bridget, the maiden, the goddess of springtime, the one who bears the flame of life, goes in search of the Kaliach, who's the queen of winter. And they're always in a dance. And one thing that I love about both of them is that they really honor each other. And they remind us that each phase of life is important for a different reason. And we don't have that much in our culture. In our culture, the springtime goddess is very admired, maybe even the summer goddess. But once you get into your crone years, you're seen less. And in these old stories, the Celtic tradition, you realize that these wise women, these old women, are very important, that the civilization does not survive without their stories, without their impulse, without their understanding of the process of life and death and rebirth, and the internal spark that we always carry. So the Cailleach acts as an ongoing midwife. So I actually did go to Loughcrew in Ireland and crawl into her cairn and have an experience in February of what it's like to sit inside this ancient. They say it's a tomb, but it doesn't feel like a tomb at all to me. It felt like a womb, a womb where you would go to remember the goddess. And then she's got a wonderful stone on the Bear Peninsula, which is down below Cork in the southwest of Ireland. And you can go there, and in that tradition, when a king would die, they would be sent out west into the setting sun. And so you can actually go there and contemplate what it is to sail into the other world, which might be, maybe you're ill and you actually are going to set sail into your next, whatever happens for you next, and get a glimpse of that. Or it might just be that you want to just sail off and just talk to these ancestors that you really love, that you miss. My father died not too long ago, and I feel like I can sail into the West and just spend the time to have a loving communion with him and come back. So she's one of the deities that helps with the connection of the other world, the thin veils, the places you can go. In the first book, there's a lot about a place called, there's the one that's well known as Tirnanog, the land under the waves. In this book, it's Tirnaban, which is the land of women. And so these are the women that can, when called, can come forward to help you. And they're usually called upon when there's a challenge. We have all kinds of challenges in our lives. And so each one responds differently to what, the challenge might just be, gosh, I'm really discovering who I am, and I'm starting to find my voice and come forward, and I need the strength to be able to speak my dreams, it's ongoing. But they can be wonderful friends.
When you were doing your research for this book, was there something, for your two books, was there a piece of mythology that really stuck out for you?
Oh gosh. All of the stories are so important. I think one of the things that really struck me most recently, and this was actually after the books were finished, but I'm working on the third book right now, which is Kings and Heroes, so I'm doing the masculine side. But last September, I went to Wales again, and I was tracking an old goddess who's actually in Heroines of Avalon, and other tales. And her name is Ellen. She's known as Ellen of the Wild Ways, and she's the antlered goddess. And she was very demonized, but she's actually incredibly sensitive. She's a goddess of nature, and she's very attuned to the way in which the forest lives and the animals move in the forest. And so I went questing for her, and found an old Roman road that follows her tracks. And following this road, I realized how connected all these stories are. Even though the story of the Cailleach might have existed 10,000 years ago, there's actually a line that runs through Britain. They call it a ley line or dragon line. most of the stories, most of the stopping places on this quest, on this sort of pilgrimage to find these aspects of the feminine, are on this one dragon line. There are a few different lines, but there's this particular one that's very strong. And so I was curious about the Druids, and if you listen to Caesar, he's going to say that they committed sacrifice and that other things. There's not like one sacrifice that they've actually ever found that a Druid committed. So I went back to this place. It's called Anglesey. It's an island that was originally called Mona. And it was where the Druids and the Druidesses were trained, because I wanted to know what it was like to be immersed in a world where you were invited to be a seer. And first, so I went, and there's some different centers and so forth you can go to, and you can also travel into these cairns, these amazing cairns, these stone. A cairn is a earthen covered stone circle. It's like Stonehenge, but has a top on it. And so you go in, and you realize that the mythic imagination might be spiral, so you might be able to wind up anywhere. But there's also a thread, a story that goes all the way through. And when you find that thread, it's like a golden thread that opens up within you, and it carries you forward. It carries you forward. So Ellen is one of my very favorites. I love all of them, but I love her in particular because of her ability to traverse not only life but death. She's another one that's a walk. She's known as a walker between the worlds. She can be here, she can fully show up, she can disappear. And then she can walk through, the land under the wave, or the land through the mountain, or the land through the sky. And we realize in following somebody like that we can choose in any moment to live in a world that seems dead, that is just, functioning biologically and really has no life in it, or we can walk down a path, and instead of seeing a tree or a bird, we see, it's an oak tree, and the Druids would open a doorway in this oak tree, and they would follow this bird into the other world that might lead them to Merlin or to Ellen or to any of these other magical beings. And at any moment, we can choose to live in an enchanted world.
And that's, I think, very empowering when people are looking, to kind of rediscover some just of the ancient past that we have, and because there's so much wisdom that comes from that,
Absolutely. Well, and the Druids were fun because you couldn't be a Druid unless, first of all, you had to be a bard, and you had to learn 250 stories of your people. It wasn't written down much except for the old Ogham, which it's old writing that's usually on sticks, sometimes on stones. But they were oral storytellers, and so they realized that in order, if you think back then too, with not much heat, not much electricity, you had to get through these long winters, and the bard had to keep the history and the story of their people alive. They had to keep hope alive. So they had to learn 250 myths in order to be considered a bard. And then at that point, once they understood the mythology, the archetypal realities that are around us, once they understood the challengers and the goddess of sovereignty, once they understood all these characters, then they could start to open up their inner sight. And they were called ovates. And so the ovates were the ones that would crawl into the cairns, and they would listen to the dreams of the earth, and they would emerge at different times with the stories that would keep their people going. They were the seers. And then after about 20 years of that, you might, if you really had tapped into your true nature, you might be considered a Druid. So you would compare them to maybe the Brahmin priests in India, or a really well-trained rabbi, or someone who had really spent an enormous amount of time, maybe a hermit in a cave too, spent an enormous amount of time listening and understanding not only this world and this how beautiful this world is, but opening up to the many, many, many dimensions. And so they've loosened themselves up enough to be fully aware, which is quite exciting. And it's something we can all do this. It's not something that's that only one person can go do. It's open to anyone who has that calling. And like I said, if someone has a sense of despair, or upset, or loneliness, or emptiness, or end of the world, or all of these stories that we hear all the time, it's actually an invitation to go deeper and to remember the stories that keep us alive. And yes, these are 14 stories of women who had enormous courage and overcame demonization. And I don't know if you had a chance to read the story of Blue Iwith, but she's quite an interesting one.
Oh, yes, I did, and I would love for you to share that, because I think our listeners enjoyed that one immensely.
She's a character because she's very well known in Welsh mythology as an adulteress and murderer. And I became curious because usually when someone's that demonized, there's a reason why. There's a moral tale that someone wants to. So you have to dig out a lot of these stories. I had to dig. It was wonderful that the priests and the monks wrote them down, but I had to dig out the real stories, find out who they were behind the agenda. So in her case, she's traditionally left in the forest to cry hoo throughout all time, and I didn't think that seemed particularly fair. So again, going back to Wales, had the sense that when you enter the forest, when you look at Blue Iwith, she's a flower. She begins conscious life, as a flower. And there's the story, it's the story before of Erenrud, the goddess who sings with the stars. And she's tricked by her brother lover and by a magician into giving birth to 2 children. And she's furious, absolutely, completely furious, and she curses her son. And one of the curses is that not only will he not have arms, but he has physical arms, but he won't have a weapon. He will never be able to marry a woman. And so at a certain point, this is becoming quite uncomfortable for Lu, who's an ancient god of light. He's the light side of the twins that she bears. Anyway, so his father, Gwydion, decides that he and Nathonwy need to develop a woman out of magic, which is okay. She's not a woman, really. She's a flower. And so Erenrud comes and she understands what's going on, and together they do make this enchanted flower into this woman. And for a long time, Lu just loves her. And but after 7 years, there's always the 7 years. After the 7 years, he feels that he needs to find out who he is as a warrior, and he needs to find his weapon, and he needs to discover who he is as a man. And so he leaves Blue Iwith. And if you think for a moment, you leave a flower in a field, the bees are going to come. This is just what's going to happen next. The bees are going to come, and things are going to sniff this flower because she's really lovely. And so Grunpal comes, and he takes her, and she doesn't really resist. She actually kind of likes this idea. And so now there's a problem because part of the enchantment was that if she was ever unfaithful to Lu, that she would turn into an owl. And so Bludwith runs, and as she's running, her feet turn into talons, and then she's flying through the air, and she realizes she's made a terrible mistake. And so she flies to Erenrud, who she feels will understand. And Erenrud does. She gives her another chance. But it happens again. And then the third time, Erenrud says, you're really going to have to make your decision about what you want, why you're here. And do you want to choose again? And so I'm not going to give away the story. You have to read it. You have to read what Blue Daiwa decides to do. But I'll give you a little hint.
A little hint. We don't want to give it all away.
I'll give you a little hint in that she decides on a path of freedom so that she can find out who she is as her own deity, as her own person. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you think about it, a lot of us get tied up in these stories, betrayal and all that. And she gives us a way of understanding maybe why we made the choices that we have, and then how we can honor ourselves again and move back into full integrity with ourselves. Yeah.
Because it's interesting. That is a journey for sure.
It is a journey. It's a huge journey, and something that we're faced with all the time. And I think that's what's so wonderful about these very earthy. The goddesses of sovereignty are very earthy. They're not perfect. They're not transcendent. They all make mistakes and they all have challenges, and yet they have this strength that's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, and so on that note, excuse me, what are some of the things you want the readers to take away from your book? One thing, like you were saying, one thing I want people to know, and this is kind of fun, is that in the legends of the Grail, the first woman to open the door to Theros, or the first person to achieve the Holy Grail, was a woman. Her name was Dendrana. And so there was another woman who achieved the Grail too. She was a Grail knight and Grail champion. Her name was Elaine. And so we're not left out of the round table. In most movies that you see women, it's all about the knights. So there are the ladies of the table they're absolutely important. In fact, without Dendrana, nobody gets the Grail. So or they don't get to Theros. But so what I would love for people to take away with these books is really, I guess, that there's a spark of light within each one of us. And if we quest, which we can do in our own living room meditation, or we can actually go out on an adventure through Wales or someplace. But if we quest, we can really find the jewels and the diamonds, the hallows that are actually our true self, our true nature. And the worn out cloak of the false self can fall away. And we can, if we really give it a little bit of attention, a little bit of awareness, we can really discover our own, who we are, as each one of us can discover who we are as the Grail, as the diamond, as the emerald, as the blue stone, or whatever. It could be anything. You don't know what's going to be there when the cloak falls away. Mm-hmm. Well, and how important is that, That is just like such an important piece.
I actually can't think of much else that's important. That's more important. If we're here on Earth to grow in terms of consciousness, the hero or heroine's quest is probably the most important quest. The stories of King Arthur are the oldest and most told stories in Western civilization. So all those archetypes are very much in our Western minds. So we know them. When we start to tap into them, we're aware of them and we know them. And, one of the first things to do is just to see who we identify with. Like I enjoy Ellen because she's a quester, But who do we identify with the most? And in that, with that identification, what are we working out? And what's the jewel as we discover the wisdom behind the tale? Do we discover the green jewel of the heart, or do we discover the yellow jewel of our brilliancy, our own intelligence? What are we going to discover on our quest? Will we return with a cup or a sword or a spear or a stone? And it makes life really fun.
Yeah, it really lets people kind of dive deeper into the whole discussion, not just about themselves, but also the divine feminine, and for men, bringing more feminine into their life as well, because you have to have that balance.
Well, it's interesting working on heroes, and I'm working on Kings and Heroes right now. And it was easier for me to write the feminine stories than the masculine. It took me a while to really drop into the more masculine archetypes. But I can see as I'm working it, the Fisher King was the archetype that helped me enter. And I can see as I work with these different archetypes, how important it is to have a whole team. Like we need the knights and the ladies, at the right round table for completely different reasons. But if one of them's missing, it's we're just not right. We know something's wrong. We have to go searching for it. We need the strength. We need our strengths. But we also need our compassion. We need our kindness. But we also need to know what the truth is. And we need to be able to defend ourselves, but then we also need to be able to give a helping hand. And so each story helps us understand when we, at what point do we choose to do the right thing. And my kids I have to say my kids really appreciate it because they go, oh yes, I remember the tale of Elaine, and she was in the boiling pool for 5 years waiting for Lancelot to come, but somehow she managed to get through the 5 years in the boiling pool, and she became the knight. And they'll say, I feel like I'm in the boiling pool, but I know I'll be okay.
I think we can all relate to that.
Exactly.
Because sometimes it's like, wow, I think we all kind of find ourselves in that boiling pool one time or another, So to be able to
absolutely,
kind of work through that. Well,
or the day when you have to go into the cave by yourself in the darkness and face the dragon. It's just got to happen today.
We all got to face our own dragons, that's for sure. Oh my goodness. Well, and so Anne, where can people connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your books?
Well, my books are available most places. You can get them on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can go onto my website, AnnKateSullivan.com. My first name is AYN, AnnKateSullivan.com. And you can find the books there. I sometimes take people on tours, and I work with a variety of writers and sometimes help people with their own personal quests. So we do, just sometimes on Skype, we help people choose their colors or go on their personal quest. So I do things like that. So they can be found, some of those things can be found on my website and on my events page if you look it up. So it's always fun to have more people join the roundtable.
And be able to be part of that discussion. Well, and, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Ann. It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your two books, Legends of the Grail and Heroines of Avalon. Again, if you'd like to connect with Ann, you can at her website, AnnKateSullivan.com, and we'll have the link below. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.